Added, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Alison. Good afternoon and welcome to this virtual meeting of South West Wales Corporate Joint Committee Overview and Scrutiny Subcommittee. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. Please ensure that your phones are switched to silent for the duration of the meeting, and in addition, when asked to raise your hand, could you raise your electronic hand, and I'll try and get to you as quickly as possible in the order you raise your hands. Okay, I haven't got any other announcements, you'll be pleased to know, so we can move on to item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? If any members have declarations in relation to any reports on today's agenda, can you please indicate now?
I can't see any indications, Chair.
Marvellous. Okay, so we're rattling through items already. Item 3, the minutes of the 2nd of November 2023 are before us today. For accuracy, do any members have any comments? Okay, can I please have a proposer for the minutes then?
I'll move, Chair.
Thank you. And seconder? Thank you, Michael. So can we all indicate we're happy to accept the minutes? Lovely. Good. Okay, Alison, I think that's unanimous. Members, if you do not... Oh, no, sorry, I don't need to say that. Excuse me. Right, I beg your pardon. Now, moving on to the item number 4, quarterly budget monitoring. So we should have, hopefully, Chris Moore in attendance, I think. Alison?
Hi. Sorry, Chair. I'm Stephen Aldred-Jones. I'm the Regional Finance Manager. I'm here on behalf of Chris Moore today.
I do beg your pardon, Steve. Thank you.
Okay.
So for the quarterly budget monitoring, can I hand over to you then?
Yeah, sure.
Present this. Thank you.
Would you like me to present on screen the report or make it easier?
Yeah, however you're more comfortable. I think that's fine. Yeah,
okay.
You can go that way.
Can you see that?
Yes, thank you.
Great, brilliant. Okay, so this is for quarter 2 financial monitoring. So that's this period end in September 23. Sorry. I'll scroll down to the bottom, the Appendix A, and I'll talk you through that. It's probably easier to do that, and then we'll work our way back up through the report.
Okay, so if you do that, that's fine, and then we can take questions at the end. And when you've done that, that'd be great.
Right. Okay, mine's finished loading. Fine. Okay, so I just go through the main variances, so the main changes to what we expected the budget to be. If you look at the accountable body, the audit Wales, the financial audit, we did have a budget in for 23-24 for 22,000, but based on the activity of the CJC, this is more likely to be in line with last year's 22-23's actuals of just under £1,800. So it's a variance of just over 20,000. Obviously, when the CJCs start undertaking more and more work, this fee will then increase in future. But for this coming year, this year, we believe it's going to be closer to £1,800. The internal audit support that's provided by Pembrokeshire Council, I've had costings through from those. Obviously, again, with the limited activity of the CJC, the costs are more likely to be 16,500 rather than a 22,000 budget. And again, for the subcommittee cost support provided by Pembrokeshire, significantly lower than the budget, so we're expecting around 3,800 charge for this year. Moving down to support services, we do have a budget for a senior accountant provided by Carmarthenshire County Council. At present, I'm picking this role up as part of my current role, so there's a large saving this year of roughly 52,000. And again, with HR, a £9,000 saving this year, again due to the low level activity within the CJCs. Scroll down to the subcommittees. So each of the subcommittees had a budget of £20,000 for this year. As you can see, most of them are only going to be spending 5,000, with the exception of transport. The regional transport plan is a lot more further developed than the other subcommittees, so they're expecting to spend 50,000 by the end of this financial year. And again, we have a planning and program management budget. This was 140,000. It was there to support the other subcommittees. So if one example spent more than 20,000, they could essentially dip into the 140,000. So at the moment, we're expecting, well, as of Q2 rather, a spend of 50,000 against that. So overall for the subcommittees, there was going to be an underspend, essentially almost half of the budget, so underspend of 105,000. Again, this is a Q2, and when we come to the 24-25 budget, we use Q3 figures, so you will notice some changes in this. If I move then down to the regional management office, the business manager left in June this year, and for Q2 we assumed the appointment would be somebody would be in post for January this year, so we'd have some spend against the salary for the rest of the year, and then some small underspends against travel and transport. The largest one here, 41,000. We have a budget 51,000 for consultancy and special advisors. Again, because of the CJC, the inactivity, we're only expecting a small 10,000 spend this year. And again, translation 5,000 against a 15,000 budget. So that leaves us with a rather healthy underspend of 295,000. And that coupled with the underspend from previous years of 385,000 leaves us with a surplus balance carry forward into future years of over 680,000, which then we can use to offset future costs when we come to look at the budget for next year, maybe utilising some of that to reduce the levy. And scroll back up to the actual body of the report. Sorry. So again, here in the body report is wording basically and explaining what I've just been through with yourselves. That just want to touch on the levy for this financial year. So the budget was set at 617,753, and here's the breakdown of the levy against the 4 constituent local authorities. This is based on population. We took from Stats Wales based on mid-year 2020. At the moment, under current legislation, the national parks are only financially obligated to support the strategic planning of the CJC, and given that there was very low activity on the strategic planning development plan, we're not charging the national parks. And again, so the financial impact, as I said, there's an underspend against a budget of 295,500, which we will then carry forward into future years. Yep. So that was a quick rush through, but this is due to low activity. There was much to go through with the budget of the CJC for Q2. So do you have any questions?
Thank you, Steve. That's great, and thanks for the explanation of the report there for the item. Did any members have any questions they'd like to raise? And can you stop sharing the screen now so we can see ourselves a bit clearer, please? Thank you. I've got a chance of seeing any hands if they're raised as well. No? Okay, I think we're okay for this item. So I think we'll move on to item 5. Well, we're just noting, isn't it, Alison, this? So
Yes, it is, Chair.
Thank you. So we've noted this item then, and there's no questions. So we'll move on to item 5, please. I assume it's you again, Steve. Is it?
Yeah, sure. So I just put it on the screen again.
Thank you.
So the CJCs have to set a budget for next year, an operational budget for 24-25 before the end of January this year. So this report today details the 3 funding options, which is going to the joint committee on the 23rd. So there's 3 funding options. They are based in the appendixes A, B, and C. So this report is presented to you today for consideration in advance of the joint committee for making its final decision. So as I mentioned in the Q2 monitoring, so the 23-24 budget was set at 617,000. As you might remember, this was option 2, do minimum. And as the financial outlook for 24-25 and beyond continues to be hugely challenging, there are 3 options attached to this report. And it's considered that due to the financial challenges faced to the constituent authorities, option 2, the continuity budget minus 10%, be endorsed. The report also includes Welsh Government grant for the Regional Transport Plan in 23-24, so the current financial year we've been awarded 125,000, and next year 100,000. So option 1 is in Appendix A is a continuity budget. So this is essentially this year's budget, 23-24, carried forward into next year, inflated by any inflationary measure we need, for example, for any salaries costs. So again, undertaking exactly what we've undertaken this year with the CJCs. Yeah, so I'm just going to scroll down. So this is a slight change to the Q2 monitoring, where I said the projected underspend with the carry forward from previous years comes to 680,000. With Q3 monitoring, we're now looking at to be in the region of 729,000. So even more underspend this year. One of the reasons is because the business manager of the CJC hadn't been appointed. We were hoping the person would start in January. They're now going to be in February, and there's some other slippages as well and underspends. So that's increased our surplus, our reserve going forward. So as I said, there's 3 options for this budget report. So the contingency budget, as we call it, so basically continuing our budget we've had in 23-24 into next year, same amount. There's also option 2, the continuity budget minus 10%. So dipping into our reserves, our 729,000 reserves, to reduce the levy placed on each local authority by 10%. And through informal discussions, we've chosen 10% to represent the significant pressures and the cuts that each local authority is having to make. So it's in line roughly with the savings each local authority having to make. So that is option 2. So option 2 is essentially option A, and option A, or option 1 and option B. Option 2 are exactly the same, whereas we just reduced the levy by 10%. Option 3 is the optimal budget, or the full operational budget. So each of the 4 leads essentially came together. We worked together to produce what they would like to do if they could have the budget needed. And this came to almost 2.1 million. So essentially more than tripling what would be the levy placed on the local authorities. There's a lot of information in this report, what each of the leads would do given the budget. I won't go through all that now. You can read that at your leisure if that's okay. So as I said, this report presents 3 draft budgets. So obviously the first one is the minimal continuity budget. The second one is the continuity budget less than 10%, and the third option, the optimal budget of 2.08 million. This report recommends the budget is based on option 2, the continuity budget less 10%, which is in line with the pressures the constituent authorities are facing. Reserves are currently forecasted at 729,000. This will then be used to support the CJC going forward and to provide resilience for future years. So if the committee agrees option 2, the levy breakdown will be as follows. So you can see these are 10% less than what they would normally be. Have you got any questions with that? Oh, somebody's got a hand up.
Yeah, no, we've got some questions, Steve. Thank you. Councillor Black.
Yeah, thank you. If I understand this correctly, what you're asking us is that the budget you're recommending is £61,775,000 less than the budget you have in the current, the levy you have in the current year, and your reserves are higher than an entire year's levy. So
Sorry,
why are you only
somebody just rang my doorbell.
Sorry?
Sorry, somebody
Okay,
just rang my
Steve.
doorbell and my dog went crazy.
Okay, do you
Sorry,
need a
let's
minute?
start
You
again.
okay? Sorry, do you
Nope.
need a minute?
My wife is going to answer the door, hopefully. Sorry about
So I
that.
thought- Yeah, I was saying, I understand the amount of the 10% levy you're recommending is I've lost this now. Hang on. It's 61,775,000 less than the levy for the current year. Yes, you have reserves of over £700,000, which is more than an entire year's levy.
That's right.
And you're
Yeah.
only recommending a 10% reduction in the amount of money you're asking local authorities to contribute, suggesting that you have over £500,000 for future years. Wouldn't it be more appropriate to actually have a much greater reduced levy than the 10%, given the hardships that all the local authorities are currently facing, and what's going to happen to local council taxpayers who may have to pay up to 10% extra on their council tax? It just seemed to me that we're storing up reserves for that sake of it.
It's okay if I answer that, Chair?
Yeah,
Please.
please go ahead.
Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you, Steve.
We know that the CJCs are quite in their infancy, and we expect in next year onwards that they will start to progress where they work. So we can hopefully, having those reserves in place will allow us then to undertake the extra piece of work required for the CJCs. So we will have the money there to allow them to then essentially start kicking off their workloads or their forward work plans.
Surely it makes sense to actually budget for that rather than relying on reserves which you call on which you don't need. If you're anticipating a higher workload next year, that should be in the budget. I don't see how the budget you've got still leaves you with over £700,000 worth of reserves. I'm sorry, I just don't accept this as a reasonable budget.
Peter,
Okay.
can I just clarify before Stephen comes in? I had a query that I think relates slightly to your question. So in item 4, 2.3, page 10, it talked about the reserve being 384,000 from the first year.
Yeah.
So then this figure of 729, is that basically the second year the reserve added to that?
To that, that's right.
So
Yeah,
it's accumulated reserves, isn't it?
that's right. Yeah.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Just wanted to clarify.
Sorry, I should have said in the options as well going forward for each of the 3 options, option A, B, and C, there's further sub options that we could then use these reserves. So the 729,000. I think it would be prudent to always have a reserve of 200,000, but then of the remaining, I think it was 529,000. I'm trying to find the part of the report. Sorry, bear with me. Maybe said that. Here we go. If you can see that on screen. So to split the reserve, so keep in 200,000 set aside for prudent measures in the future. So using 529,000. So and then halving that so each of the year. So using 265,000 roughly to reduce the levy further. But does that make sense?
But
So
when would you reduce that levy?
So going forward next year and in the future year, so offsetting the levy with another 265,000 each year. So for 24, 25 and 25, 26.
I think given the situation all local authorities are facing this year, I think they would appreciate if they had the money up front rather than having to wait 2 or 3 years for it, to be honest. I really think this budget, even this 10% budget is completely unreasonable. Anyway, that's
Okay.
my view.
Thank you for that, Councillor Black. Councillor Percy, I think you were next.
Yeah, diolch Cadeirydd, thank you. Yeah, well, my questions come in at a slightly different angle to Councillor Black, though. I think his concerns around, the impact on local authority finances are completely valid. We're all going through really tough times. My concern is in terms of the value for money we're getting from the do minimum option with the CJC. Again, I get the rationale of not putting undue pressure on local authorities, but if we're going to do this, I'd rather us get some outcomes from it. And I think it's concerning to me that this is the second budget we've had where there's been an acceptance that we require, or the CJC requires, £2 million budget to actually achieve its outcomes. And we're not providing that finance, and we're not actually going to be able to deliver what the CJC is supposed to deliver. So I'd question what value for money we're actually getting from the do minimum option. But I guess where I'm particularly concerned is well, what does the future outlook look like? Because obviously the financial situation in local authorities is not likely to get any better overnight or anytime soon. We've been in this situation for quite a while. So if we're going to keep trundling on into future years with do minimum budgets, I feel like we're just going to fritter away quite a lot of money and achieve very little. I would rather us actually spend a bit more money and achieve a lot more than spend a little bit of money every year and kind of get nowhere. So I'd like a bit of an indication really how the CJC is expecting to fund its activities in future years, because if there's an expectation of grant funding, that doesn't appear to be my understanding of how the CJCs are intended to operate. They're intended to operate with a contribution from the local authorities. And if we're not going to give that, then I don't really understand how we're going to achieve anything other than the statutory minimum.
Okay, Steve, if you could
Yeah, sure, thanks.
answer that.
The only grant funding we're aware of currently is the 125,000 for the RTP in this year, and then another 100,000 next year, again for the RTP. Yes, as Councillor Sean Percy said, it is the expectation that local authorities do fund the CJCs as part of from their own, essentially their own budgets. Again, I'm not aware of any other funding other than that we do have almost 700, or we will have almost 730,000 worth of reserves going forward. Again, obviously it's going to be for the joint committee then to make the decision when and how much of those reserves are utilised next year and then going forward.
Okay, thank you. I mean, just for context, do you know what the other CJCs are doing in terms of?
I believe most of them, other than Cardiff, I believe we are more. I'm reasonably new in post, but I believe the other CJCs.
Fine, I won't hold you to it word for word.
Okay, thank you. So we are more advanced than the other CJCs, I believe. But I think that also some of the other CJCs are looking to, choose my words carefully, but combine or with the city deals they have to try and achieve some cost efficiencies with those. So that might be something for the future then to consider.
Okay, that's certainly something that could be looked at in the future. I agree with Councillor Percy. Local authorities are going to be facing difficult budgetary decisions for the next few years. So I think it's welcome that we're looking at a 10% reduction. I agree with Councillor Black as well. It would be good if we could have seen a further reduction, and what maybe that would have been something that the CJC could have had presented to it in terms of different options, because maybe that's something we could feed back. And I'm sorry,
sure.
I know you're still waiting to come in. Michael, I'll be 1 second, but just if there'd been an option for maybe a 15% reduction or something as well, because the reserves are still and would have still been accumulating. But I recognise, as you've said, that the CJCs are in an infancy kind of stage and do minimum kind of stage. Anyway, that's just some thoughts on those questions so far. Thank you both for that. Michael, would you like to come in, Councillor John?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I think you summed up really what I was feeling on the back
Oh,
of
I'm
the previous
sorry.
two speakers. Really, I think we all feel about the same. Yeah, a 10% cut means that each authority is still putting money in, basically just to go into reserves at a time when we're looking to pull money out of our own reserves to try and plug gaps and fund things which are statutory and have to be done. Appreciating this has to be done as well, but it's almost putting money into a savings account for something in the future which we wouldn't necessarily do now if you can't afford it at home, would you? You'd have to balance where you put your money. But then going on to what we're doing long term, I mean, if I go to page 17 of the report, at the top it says the CJC has already endorsed the regional economic development plan, etc., etc. And it says a dedicated staff resource will be required to deliver the plan. The indicative cost is estimated at 410,000 for 24-25, to include a project manager, 4 program officers. Are those new posts? Are they going to be advertised externally to come in from wherever in industry or other authorities, or these people who are going to be sort of headhunted within the 4 authorities? It'd be interesting to know that, and if those plug places will then be fulfilled or backfilled in the authorities, because it's moving the cost from one to the other really then. And it also says a 5-year operational budget has been estimated at 1.755 million. Well, where's this money coming from? I mean, we've already heard there's no grant funding being allocated or hinted at from Welsh Government. I wouldn't have thought, and I don't want to speak for other authorities, but I wouldn't have thought the authority I represent can afford to put a quarter or just under a quarter of that in just to fulfil this this plan. So I really don't know where we're going with this, to be honest, and getting a little bit sort of confused with it all.
Okay.
Points more than questions, I suppose.
Thank you, Councillor John. Stephen, can I ask you to
Yeah, sorry.
respond,
Yeah,
please?
thank you for that question. Yes, that was for the optimal budget. It was almost as if it was for a wish list. If we could do whatever we needed to do, and almost money essentially was no object, what would we like to have? And those with regard to the posts, I'm not 100% certain, but I believe they would be potentially, and I'm not 100% certain, but taken from existing staff within local authorities if there were staff available. And then obviously, if need be, they'd be then essentially backfilled, but I'm not certain about that.
Okay, thank you, Stephen.
So,
Michael,
sorry,
did you want to
Chair,
come back?
Yeah, just
please
for one
do.
point, really. I mean, when these or the concept of these corporate joint committees was set up 3-4 years ago now, and took 12-18 months to get the first meetings together, etc. I mean, things were a lot different across the economic climate than they are now. I think some feedback needs to go back to Welsh Government that these figures we're looking at over this year and over the next few years just aren't achievable. And if things do change in 2 years, 3 years, maybe it's the time to do it, but at the moment there's just no money there for it. So I really don't see what we're going to achieve unless there are drastic changes to how it's funded.
Thank you, Michael. Sorry, Councillor Percy, you've been very patient there. I didn't ask if you wanted to come back before, so.
Oh, no, no problem, Chair. That's fine. I wanted to hear how the discussion went, but just sort of following on from what Michael's picked up in the report there, which Stephen's explained, is option 1, that kind of ideal scenario to deliver the objectives. I think certainly what I'd be looking for from the CJC is at least a pathway of how we get to that point or nearer that point. I'm quite uncomfortable with the idea of rolling over minimum budgets year by year without a plan as to how we're going to ramp up the work. And I think that comes to Peter's point as well. If things are going to ramp up, that needs to be in a budget so we can actually see where we're going. And I think if there's any feedback that perhaps we might want to a future meeting, from my point of view, it would be what does that pathway look like to get out of do minimum? Because we can't just rely on the magic that local authorities are going to have lots of money and then decide to put it into this, because that doesn't seem realistic to me at the moment. And I think that's kind of what we need. We need some feedback as to, well, what does this plan look like for us to achieve those objectives? What is a realistic plan? Because this is not, I can't see that this is sustainable, and I can't see that Welsh Government or others would support and endorse this approach long term either.
Thank you very much, Councillor Percy. I welcome those comments. I think they're very fair. I'd just like to bring Councillor Turney in now. Sorry, Mark.
That's okay. Thank you very much. I think I kind of share a little bit of everything that's been said so far, because you know, progress is quite important, and I think that's what the public eventually, if they get to see much of this, will want us to be able to demonstrate as well, that we're scrutinising what's happening here. In terms of the underspend, clearly the underspend has gone up from the last time you reported to us to now.
Mm-hmm.
What's your impression of the next trajectory? And is there a sort of a plan to kind of spend that underspend, and how rapidly is that likely to happen in the sort of the next 12 to 18 months?
So from Q3 to Q4, so I don't believe there will be much change to our projected outturn. So I think the underspend, the cumulative underspend, so the reserve position will be around the 730,000 mark. We do know that the new CJC business manager is starting the next, I think, 2 to 3 weeks maybe. So, which we've built into the budget. Yeah, so I think this year, I think I'm reasonably confident that our underspend and total reserves will be around 730,000. But going forward, spending it next year, it all depends again what the Joint Committee budget choose have. Obviously, there's some of the regional transport. They have this grant, 125,000 this year and 100,000 next year, and they're quite keen to progress that. They've done a lot of work already, so they're keen to start spending. With the other regional subcommittees, it's a little bit more different. I think some of them are different stages again to the regional transport. But yeah, it's really difficult to say, to be honest, with any confidence where we could be. Again, if it's another continuity budget, the subcommittees, essentially, they only have it, again, roughly 20,000 budget built in for next year for each of those. So the only slippage they could have underspend is 20,000. So so our reserves would not change significantly then if they don't all spend the 20,000 or whatever would be next year. So that's not.
Let me get this right. So their budget remains at 20,000. We've
plus
got
inflation.
And hundreds of thousands sitting in our reserves, sitting in the reserves that they can't then access.
No, they can access.
They can.
Yeah.
So to front load something. So I think what Sean is sort of saying, and what I'm sort of saying, is that we actually want to start seeing something happen.
Yeah.
But if they're working just on a continuity basis, we're never going to proceed, are we, in anything? Because if we're just kind of working on that, well, we didn't do anything for the first 2 years and we'll just start doing something now. They need to really start picking up the pace from the lost time, don't they, to kind of get something done, or we'll be in another election cycle and actually there won't be an awful lot. There'll only be 2 years worth of action when there should have been maybe 5.
So there's almost two choices. Do we use the reserves to offset future levies, or do we use the reserves to start doing more with the CJCs? So essentially that's the decision going forward, I guess.
Or just to do what they said they were going to do, which is not where we're at the moment, is it?
No.
We're not. So how do we get that message back? I think we need to kind of get
that
message back from here.
Mark, yeah, I think, you know, there's a general consent. Please interrupt me if I'm wrong, but I think there's a general consensus. We'd like to see the CJC start to step up towards some of the tasks they're going to do. But I think we all also recognise the financial climate that we're in terms of, you know, if they had gone for a £2.1 million all you can eat budget, that wouldn't have been realistic in terms of a levy. So, Alison, is it an option for us to draft a letter to the CJC to just express our concerns about the I think Councillor Percy's point is really relevant in terms of the actual cost, the cost of everything that we get done because of running on a low budget is higher in terms of, you know, we've got this legal entity, trying to explain myself properly. But if it only does the transport plan, we've still got to have democratic services, we've still got to have translation, we've still got to have audit, we've still got to have the counting, and then the value for money for the resident and the taxpayer is reduced because we've got the structure. Whereas if we were using it a bit more effectively, maybe. But I think that comes back to the points that this committee's made previously to the CJC about funding from Welsh Government, funding from Westminster. Please, what are your thoughts on that? Because I don't want to speak for the committee. I'd like you to speak, Councillor Black.
Yeah, I broadly agree with what you're saying, but I think that we should also make it clear that unless the CJC has a clear plan to spend a significant amount of that money in the reserve next year, that there should be further reductions in the levy, well beyond 10%.
I certainly agree that they should have considered that. Maybe they should be considering that as well, right? In terms of that's not an option on the table. I don't understand why. So, we'll add that in, please, Alison and Councillor Percy.
Yeah,
Sean, sorry.
Yeah, I think you summarised sort of a lot of my concerns quite well there. I think the only thing I sort of want to stress is that I think we need to see that pathway from where we are now.
Yeah, I agree. I missed that bit. Sorry. Yeah, the pathway from the continuity to the full implementation. Yeah, and the how they see that progressing. I completely agree.
And I think from the financial point of view with local authorities, if that is done over a multi-year period and we've got a forecast, then at least it gives authorities time to prepare and budget if there is going to be an increase in levy over time. It's not like, as we just said, maybe it goes up to 2 million in 1 year. That's unrealistic. But actually, what local authorities need is an understanding of, in their medium-term financial plan, what's coming down the line and what's expected of them. And if ultimately that is going to happen, local authorities need to know. And if we're in a situation where the CJC is not planning to do that over the next 5 years, then there's a whole other discussion to happen here around how.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's really valid. I also think the point that Stephen made when he was talking about the potential of the city deal structure as well, or being blended into the CJC now. That's maybe something that we could ask them to look at, because it's a multi-year thing and that's coming to an end. Alison, that's a lot. Sorry, did you get all of that?
I think I captured most of it, Chair, but I'll double check on the recording.
Fantastic.
I'll send the draft to you when thing goes anyway.
Amazing, brilliant. Do we have any other questions on item 5? No. Okay, good. Well, item 6 then, I think. Thank you, Stephen, for the presentation on item 4 and 5. And sorry you got grilled quite heavily there, but
that's fine.
you kept really well. Well done. Good job. Forward work programme next, isn't it? Is it? Am I right? Item 6, and that's for noting. Okay, thank you. Anything from anyone? No. I think the discussion previously sort of covers it really. And then item 7, no urgent items. There are no urgent items that have been brought to my attention. So I'd like to thank you all for attending today's meeting. I look forward to us getting a response from the CJC to our concerns from item 4 and 5, really. But thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Okay, thank you.